Welcome everybody to, do you know how odd it feels to be introducing the Cleevely lecture? It feels very peculiar indeed, but still, there we go. My pleasure to introduce, welcome you here to the CSAP and to introduce our three speakers, or a speaker and two respondents to be technically correct. So our main speaker is Indro Mukerjee, who's the CEO of Innovate UK. And he's going to talk about why it's time to seek ingenuity and boldness in UK innovation. I absolutely agree. There's no point when you have major economic blocks and powers sitting out there who can see exactly the same kind of things as we can, and then just simply trying to imitate them or just do exactly the same. We have to do things very, very differently. And he's going to talk about Innovate UK's plan for action, which sets out the key themes, the commitment and approaches to determine how innovation can be used to create and sustain a positive future for the society and economy. And then after that, which will be a relatively short talk, we're going to have two respondents. So in order of speaking, it's going to be firstly Professor Andy Westwood, who's Professor of Government Practice and Vice Dean for Social Responsibility in the Faculty of Humanities at the University of Manchester. Thank you for coming down, Andy. And Professor Anna Vignol, who's the Director of the Leverhulme Trust and a Distinguished Professor of the Economics of Education. We had a great warm-up about 2 or 3 weeks ago where we discussed various topics. This is a different format, but I'm sure it's going to go extremely well. And I'm going to turn to our guest speaker. Indro, welcome.
Thank you very much indeed, David. Thank you, David, indeed. And indeed, it is a pleasure to be giving your eponymously named lecture this
Not
evening.
often one gets to use that word.
Okay, well, thank you for that introduction, and thank you to CSAP for the invitation to give this year's lecture. It's great to be back in Cambridge. Cambridge is, for me, a very vibrant, stimulating place with lots of energy, entrepreneurial spirit, the innovation passion, and the use of the term Cambridge phenomenon, which sometimes is used to describe the incredible achievement of what this ecosystem, or indeed this cluster, has managed to achieve. And so my ambition as CEO of Innovate UK is to see this thrive in Cambridge, but also to see this replicated in other places across the UK. And this is one of the themes that I'll come back to in what I'm going to share with you this evening. So I'm CEO of Innovate UK, the UK's innovation agency, and so I would like to share with you as to why this is a very good time to be really focused on innovation. And actually, it's not just a good time, it's a very necessary time to be focused on innovation. Before I do that, I want to outline 4 lenses which I will be kind of thinking about as I give my talk. And these 4 lenses are, in a way, a kind of informal autobiography because they'll give an indication of the thought process that I go through in the stuff that I do. The first lens is that up until a year ago, every single year of my career was spent in private business, with most of the time being spent as a leader of businesses. And those businesses have varied from businesses with thousands of people to businesses with hundreds of people, businesses with tens of people. And I've seen the innovation journey across many different areas. And that gives me a pretty strong flavour for the perspective of and the respect for innovators. The second lens is that in building up that experience, I typically don't describe the innovation journey by business models or by products or services or technologies. I typically describe it by people. And innovation journey is really something which is a roller coaster emotionally for many people. The highs are fantastic, but the lows can also be there as well. And in real world innovation, both of those two things go together. And so it's important for us to understand that as we go to the hopes, there's also the issue of having to decide how you deal with some of the challenges as well. because not all ideas come to fruition commercially. Many fail, and the ones that do really take a lot of effort to really get there. The third lens is that I'm first generation British and grew up, actually Indian father, Italian mother, and grew up in a part of London in an era where I could see both the very best of what this country is, but occasionally also the not so very best of what this country is. And having grown up in a socio-economic environment which will be surprising to those of you who don't know me, I am a strong believer in the real need to give opportunity and to give a chance in a very open and fair and strong way. And if we can do this in the UK, we have a chance to do something incredible in the world, because we have the raw material in our country, we have the diversity, we have the ingredients across the UK. It's up to us, if we are able, as those of us who affect the system, to see whether we are able to use this to get to the best from that talent and that potential. So I'm going to come back to that point as well in what I talk about. I'm doing this job because I deeply care about it. I deeply care about the science and technology system, and I deeply care about the effect that the science and technology system can have for our economy, and ultimately, and in my view more importantly, for our society. Because society then impacts, because the economy impacts society. And at the end of the day, what we want is a fair, open, prosperous, happy, healthy society. And I think that the work that we do, we hope that can lead to that. So these are the four lenses that I'm going to be mentioning as I talk. And with these in mind, I want to try and see if I can stimulate some energy, ideas, and perhaps questions and discussions for later. Incidentally, any of you joining the dinner later, greater love hath no one than to give up the England-Germany game, because that's what's happening later. So if any of you are football fans, and you'll have gone through this anguish as I have, and my colleague Ian Brotherston is also a football fan over there. So we will have done that, and those of you that don't know what I'm talking about will obviously not know what I'm talking about. So if I look at this audience and look at the pedigree of the community here, and some of the finest minds in the UK, some of the finest minds in the world, I'm not going to try to talk to you about deep innovation policy. I'm going to try and share with you some passion, some emotion, some experience, some ideas, some things that we are doing, and see if we can stimulate some discussion in that way. And so you won't get a strongly policy-orientated thing, but what you'll get is to have some thoughts about where we are going as an organisation and what are my hopes for that organisation. So let's start with what is innovation. Innovation is one of these words that sometimes you wish that the organisation was called something else, because it's a word that can be used for almost any single meaning at all. And by the way, between us, occasionally I've even spotted that innovation can be one of these I am Spartacus words, because we have a bit of a tendency towards innovation support and funding, and unsurprisingly lots of people put their hands up and say, yes, I'm an innovator. And so this I am Spartacus thing is quite a thing at the moment, which that's not surprising. My intention is to try and give a bit of a feeling and a flavour to say that for me, innovation is about turning science and technology into added value business reality, or turning knowledge into reality, or turning knowledge into turning knowledge into economic reality, or turning knowledge into money. I don't really mind, and I'm not really here for the semantics. What I'm trying to explain that Innovate UK, our primary focus is on business-related innovation. That's the job that we are interested in doing. So we use public money, actually your money and everyone else's money, to help business innovation, so ideas to translate themselves into economic reality. And in the year that I've been doing this job, I've been really very, very encouraged by the strong interest, and actually a very good time from a government point of view, because certainly from a government point of view, I've seen no shortage of interest, support and focus on this area of innovation. None at all. Be it from BEIS, be it from Treasury, be it all the way across government. Ministers, Secretary of State, all very, very focused on turning knowledge into economic reality and seeing that happen in the UK. And this, I think, is a very good time to be involved in this area and this activity. You know, to innovate as a business is a very, very challenging thing. You've got to work out a value proposition. You've got to work out how you would cost that value proposition, what you'd charge for it, how you'd market it, who are your competitors, what are the problems, what are the challenges, how long does it take to get something to market, are there regulatory barriers, are there export issues, are there selling issues, are there personality issues in terms of the customers. There's a myriad of things, and there is a myriad of things. I could go on, I could make an entire thing just on the subject of that. And many of you in this room will have your own personal experience of this exact entrepreneurial, innovative journey. And so innovators actually are doing something really, really challenging, which is to overcome all of those different things. And our role as Innovate UK is to try and help them in that journey. Sometimes to help to de-risk the journey, sometimes to assist the journey, sometimes to inspire the journey, sometimes to accompany them on the journey. But our role is to go on that journey with them and to see and hope that more and more businesses make it through from idea into something that actually lives. And we know how hard that is. Innovation and research are different things. They're very connected. They're both part of the same ecosystem. And actually, but they are very different things. And we want to see stronger fluidity between innovation and research. In fact, actually, we fund universities. A substantial amount of money from Innovate UK goes directly to universities. We have the knowledge transfer program. We have the innovation to commercialization programs. We collaborate with the research councils. So the fusion between research and innovation is something that's very, very important to us, and we see a lot of vibrancy and relevance in that connection. So we work very hard on wanting to see more and more of that. We want to see a strong fusion between the two communities because we think there is a huge opportunity for talent as well. Not talent that just goes in one area or another, but talent that moves between the two. PhD candidates or PhDs who are potential C-level people in businesses. In many parts of the world, including here, by the way, this works fine and it works very well. It doesn't work as well throughout the whole of the UK, and one of our challenges is to try and help that system. And so we really want to do that because we see huge opportunities in doing that. So let's do more innovation. I don't think that's a very controversial thing to say. Everyone would agree with that. There's nothing to not like in saying, let's innovate more. The thing is why, and the thing is how. So let's look at the why first. And again, I'm not going to get into detailed policy stuff, but for me, there are three simple reasons for it. And those three simple reasons are productivity, resilience, and people. Productivity is, there's a fairly well-known sense that since the financial crash in the sort of 2008-2009 period, our productivity in the UK has not been fantastic. In fact, we lag behind many countries in that regard. And there's a strong correlation between productivity lag and the investment that goes into R&D. And so naturally we see, and actually more importantly than us, the government sees, that there is a correlation between the two, and this is why there is this quest for the 2.4% of GDP and a strong quest to have frontline relevant investment in research and development. The second word I used was resilience, and so there are many reasons for resilience to do with supply chains, to do with health, to do with net zero, to do with environment, to do with security, why we need to innovate as a nation. We need our supply chains to be more solid. We need to own more of our supply chains, especially the very strategic ones. We need to be in an environment where we can keep our people healthier, help them to live longer, keep our nation safe, keep our nation secure, keep our nation educated, and to do all those things at the same time, as well as go into the next stage of net zero, which in a way we've done kind of some of the basic parts. The next stage is much harder when you look at net zero in the context of people traveling more and doing more. And so you need to be innovative. And so we have programs and we have ways of working across all of those different areas I mentioned. And innovation is a vital component to our succeeding as a nation in each and every one of those different areas. The third word I used was people. And the reason why people is important is because along with the productivity gap that I mentioned to you, there's also a distribution of that productivity gap across the UK. It's quite strong in some parts, but not so strong in others. And the consequence of that is that you get inequalities. And you get inequalities which are not the same as lack of talent and lack of potential. They're just inequalities. And so we have to do something about that. And so innovation is relevant to us as a nation for those three words: productivity, resilience, and people. And if we can make a significant contribution whilst the environment is good and take advantage of this, take advantage of the money that is being deployed into this area, do something significant, do something valuable, this is potentially a period of our history which people will look back on in the future as the precursor to a golden era of innovation. And this is the reason why I'm working hard and doing this job, because I cared very deeply to be able to make an impact and make a contribution to allow that to happen. Oh, and by the way, I mentioned the word people, and I could have also added the word place to it as well, because those two things actually go together. So right now, the stakes are very high. Getting this right as a nation is extremely high. And the rest of the world is not standing still. We are a relatively small country in many ways. We have 1% of the famous 1% and 1.5%, population and GDP type of stuff. And so we've got a huge amount that we need to do as a nation. And a lot of things are changing in the world. Most of you are in policy, technology, science, or all three. And so you don't need me to tell you that things are changing very, very quickly. So to keep up with those things, to keep ahead of those things takes a lot. And so the stakes are really very high. So we, last November, launched this plan for action. So this document here is in response to the government's innovation strategy. It is a summary of how we will work to support UK business. It's a kind of manifesto, if you will. And you can access it online. If you just Google Innovate UK Plan for Action, you can see it there. We have statements on how we will support UK business. We have areas of intent, which I'll maybe touch on in a few moments. And we have a number of ambitions which we believe are relevant in going along the lines of what I just said we would do, which is to really be able to propel ourselves and accelerate the innovation that's taking place in UK business right now. So this plan for action includes a number of important themes and foundations. Actually, there are 5 themes and 6 foundations. And each of these themes and foundations has been specifically and strategically chosen to resonate the journey that I've just been outlining for the previous minutes in what I said earlier. So the themes are future economy. So building for the future is vital. Innovate UK, previously called Technology Strategy Board, is an organisation that's 15 years old this year. And we need to be planning for the next 15 years. We need to be looking, horizon scanning, open to ideas, seeing white spots in industries and areas. Horizon scanning to the extent of being able to predict, to being able to guess, being able to stimulate. And even when we can't predict exactly, we should stimulate areas for debate, discussion, and focus. And so this is an important thing to help build the future economy. The second theme is growth at scale. This is something that's very important in the UK. In many ways, we have 2 valleys of death. The one that's often used, which is the valley of death that happens between when an idea takes place and then the business doesn't quite get off the ground, and so it's lost in that first one. So this is a widely recognized term. But actually, there is a second valley of death, which is where business does take off and does start to scale and does get customers and an organization and employees and stuff like that, but then can't get the funding to then scale up to that level. And this is a challenge, and I think this is another area of strong focus, as much for us as with the partners that we work with, because there needs to be an end-to-end solution for this. Global opportunities is a third theme, and that speaks for itself. We need to be able to engage with the wider world and be able to get our technology, our products, our services, our ideas engaged for competitive gain in the wider world. And this is where the things I mentioned earlier come into play. So can you predict who your customers are going to be? Do you know what it takes to sell to those customers, etc.? It all becomes harder when you talk about global opportunities. It's hard enough to do it in the next town, but it's even harder to do it in the next continent. We need to be able to get the best out of the innovation ecosystem, which is massively rich in the UK. My God, I mean, if I had nothing else to do, just to understand the entire tapestry of our innovation ecosystem in the UK would take a lifetime's work. And I can guarantee that to you, that if any of you ever tried to understand the whole lot of it, you won't in a lifetime, because it's evolving, it's rich, and it's often quite complex, and sometimes even contradictory. That simply reflects who we are as people. That's just who we are, because people create ideas, ideas translate themselves into initiatives, and the minute you say, I'm going to consolidate and do this, someone else has thought of another thing. And so don't try and break that, try and harness it. And I'll come back to that in a while. And the last theme is in the book, you'll see it, is the government levers, and this is a really very important part, which is relevant for two parameters. One is regulation, and the other is procurement. And these are both two areas where we are working on quite extensively. Time doesn't permit me to go into any of this in any depth, because clearly each one of those areas I just touched on is a subject in itself. But I wanted to mention them to you nonetheless, because this is the tapestry of how we see the innovation levers for the UK. And the strong foundations this is all built on, which we want to really use, are the science and research system, design, which is often a forgotten part of how you innovate. And design is much more important than just the colour of something. There are many, many aspects of design. And so design is a very, very rich aspect in innovation, which we are putting significant effort into supporting. Societal impact and responsible innovation, this becomes more and more important as our lives become more complex. Technology becomes more beneficial in one way and intrusive in another. So the whole aspect of societal impact becomes an important function to consider. And then the last two, which are here, and for me they are very linked, which is talent and skills and equality, diversity and inclusion. I see those two things as very much linked, because we will not do what we want to do as a nation if we don't have the talent and skills pipeline to drive it. I'm very much in favour of getting brilliant people from other countries to come here and to base themselves here and so forth, and we should do a lot more of that, and that's great. But we also have to be very, very mindful that to have the doctors, the scientists, the engineers, the technicians, the apprentices, everything, we need to also be able to give opportunity to the people here in our country who may not have been at the forefront of opportunity and inclusion. So this is a fundamental part which is relevant from a human point of view, and I'd hopefully like to see that people see that and acknowledge that. But even if people don't acknowledge that, acknowledge it from a business point of view, because otherwise we won't have enough of the skills and talent to be able to do what we need to do. So I want to sort of draw out, as I draw things to a close, a few messages, kind of meta messages to share with you, and maybe this leads to some dialogue later, or some questions, or some follow-up. First of all, we need far more companies innovating in the UK. And in order to do that, we have to be able to touch, inspire, help, support more and more SMEs. The transformation will happen when we can reach more and more SMEs. So, as an organisation, we want to emphasise the importance of how we connect with SMEs. So we're trying to make ourselves simpler, we're trying to make our accessibility much better. I have this internal expression, shop front, which we are using for the Innovation Hub, which is a more technical term for it, which is something which you will see in the second half of this year, where we will be changing the way that SMEs can find innovation support from Innovate UK and other organisations through a 3-click system, and being able to quickly access support and to really profile ourselves as a public service. I see Innovate UK as a public service, a service that's open to any and all SMEs and actually any and all businesses completely, but any and all SMEs in the UK, where they can find help for their innovation journey, be it funding help, be it advisory help, be it skills help, etc. The 2.4% quest, which you all know about and probably have discussed here before, and I think that Minister George Freeman was here speaking at a CSAP event a couple of months ago. So you know all about this. So this needs public and private partnership. In fact, best innovation, best entrepreneurial systems are the ones where there is a collaborative public-private partnership. And that's the name of the game. So we are very much working in our plan for action, in all the work that we do, to link together very strongly with the private sector. And for us, progress is all about a very strong link between the public and the private sector. We definitely need more and better procurement connections. Has anyone ever heard of the program called SBRI? Great, okay. So SBRI, which is actually Ian's program there, and Ian, you are a CSAP fellow, if I'm a policy fellow, in fact. So SBRI is our program. We've had it for some time, and we want to put more energy, resource, and back into that because I see the chance of really increasing that, potentially even giving it a, dare I say it, a slightly more sexy name, perhaps. But anyway, we see huge potential in the better connecting of public and private and everything that goes with it. And that's maybe something we can come back to later in the questions. I talked already about future economy and horizon scanning. So as Innovate UK, we have quite a broad range of different, if you like, products and services that we offer to UK business. We have deep sector teams which are in traditional sectors. We also have all of the challenge work that's done through the UK, and there's a very substantial amount of money that goes into challenge work and challenge funds. We have the Catapult network, the knowledge transfer network, the Edge network, which is an advisory service, and so altogether this is a very substantial array of products, services and support right across the whole range, from financial support through grants and loans to non-financial support through advisory and help with exporting and help with skills and help with raising money and so forth. I see huge opportunities in terms of how we can use that massive network better, and so we have a program internally called the Future Economy Review where we're looking across all of these programs, and you'll see through the second half of this year how we will be responding to changing the way that we work according to the learning that we found from seeing how many different things that we've been doing and how we can maybe harness them in a stronger way. We've gained huge experience through our Catapult network, and we have, as a result of that experience, a really very good sense of what I think is a very, very powerful network of assets. And assets, I mean people principally, but also equipment, know-how, and skills all the way through. And so this is a very substantial array of assets that we have. And we're going to go through a program which we're calling the New Deal, within which we will strengthen the strategic coherence that our catapults have with us and we with them. And what we will do is to make a much stronger set of strategic coherence such that we can raise the bar in terms of thought leadership and target in a number of areas. And I'm very excited about this. I think we can really transform things quite significantly. Partnerships is really important, as we look at the way we partner, we have opportunities with research councils, National Physical Laboratory, Royal Academy of Engineering, Intellectual Property Office, BSI, Health and Safety Executive, loads of groups, which include, I was at the Institute for Manufacturing last month, I think it was, and of course CSAP. And so basically, I see huge opportunity in the collaboration. And we have three words that we use as Innovate UK: inspire, involve and invest. And inspire is to be able to give the inspiration and help the inspiration for these brilliant people who decide to go on the innovation journey, because these are the real heroes that we need to support in this journey. Involve is essential because this is how we work with a broad community and ecosystem. And so this is why I mentioned this part of it. And then invest is the investment part that I mentioned. The skills side is really important, fluidity and opportunity, and I think we have a huge asset if we can get this if we can get this right in the UK. Now, going forward, I see a lot of need to deliver. So Innovate UK is a delivery organisation. Of course, we have policy elements to it, we have strategy elements, we have think tank parts, we have thought leadership parts, etc. But at the end of the day, we have to deliver actual delivery support to UK business so that UK business can become more innovative and achieve the targets and milestones that I explained at the start of my talk. And so this is ultimately what we're going to be judged on. Too many people in our system, the public system, focus on input as the metric. And this is relevant especially at the time of discussing budgets and funding. There's a kind of macho thing going on where you say, well, I managed to get government to give me more money than you, therefore I'm more important. I think we should change our system to an output, an outcome focus. And so we're working very hard on an impact framework. We're working very hard on a set of holistic measures for outcomes and output. And this will be another area that it will be great to collaborate and share thoughts and ideas, because we see this as ultimately the objective that we have as an organisation, to focus on output and outcomes and not just talk about the input. The assumption on the input measure is sometimes that the more you do, the assumption is that you'll have a better success, and that's a little bit like putting money into a slot machine. So we like to try to orientate ourselves more like a business would, which is to try and strategize, aim, and task ourselves with optimizing how we should be spending the money, how we should be working so that we increase the chance of our success. I would like to lastly address all of you as partners, but also as taxpayers, because I stress again, Innovate UK, like many organisations in the public sector, is funded by you. It's taxpayers' money. And so our duty is to the UK, to you, to all of you as partners, but also all of you as taxpayers. And we are very, very focused on that area. So we're very focused on being accountable for ourselves, taking our responsibility, operating in a very prudent, appropriate, but also sometimes needing to be bold and pushing things very, very strongly. And so I promise you my best as a leader. I promise you the best of our fantastic team. And I really am very determined that we make a significant difference. So thank you very much for listening. I'm open to any questions that you have. Thank you.
Thank you, Indro. It's great hearing a coherent framework being developed for these things, and this, in particular, I'm very interested to hear this idea about let's look at the outputs. I'm sure we're going to get onto some discussion about that rather than the inputs. But Andy, I think you're up next going to respond with some thoughts. If you've got a microphone that's on,
that sounds promising,
good,
doesn't it? Brilliant. Well, thank you, David, and thank you, Indro, for those really kind of interesting descriptions and insights, not only into your own journey through this to this point, but also your plans for the future. I guess I should also say happy birthday to Innovate UK for 15 years, because. Mainly because I was involved in sort of spinning it out as a separate organisation when I was working in government. So it kind of reminds me how old I am. So it's not an entirely happy birthday in that sense. I really liked your clear focus on your purpose, and so I kind of wrote down, turning science and technology, turning knowledge into money, and I think that is an admirable and clear strategy, and the idea that this is, but the understanding that this is public money that helps support business innovation and kind of changes and improves economic reality. I really like that, and it made me think about why government is so supportive of that agenda, and you covered some of these issues, and let me kind of run across them again a little. Why is government so focused on turning knowledge into money? Well, we know that government is focused on turning knowledge into money and using R&D and innovation as a way of doing that. That's why, as you touched on, government is committed to spending £20 billion on R&D by the end of this Parliament. More than that, actually, if you include tax credits and allowances.
Yep.
So, you know, this is a big bet that government is making on you as an organisation and on R&D more broadly to kind of transform a particular set of things. And as you said, you know, we know why they are doing that, and we know why they are so supportive. We know that kind of, and we agree that R&D and innovation can be a central element of addressing low productivity. And you're right to say that, particularly since the financial crisis, that's been a particular challenge, and that read through to living standards, to wages, and so on is an issue. It's interesting that I think at the last, it seems a long time ago, the last political party conference, but at it, is he still the Prime Minister? Well, the Prime Minister then said that kind of a transition to a high-pay, high-productivity, high-skills economy was the country and the government's single biggest objective. And in his words, he said that's what people voted for in 2016 and 2019. Now, you might query slightly his interpretation of that. But in a sense, that and that kind of the spatial agenda, the place agenda, the levelling up agenda, you know, those are pretty clearly the two strongest domestic agendas that this government has. And it's clear that R&D and Innovate UK are a big part of that. I should add, because I'm a bit of a curmudgeon, that while the 2.4% target is incredibly important, the OECD average is already 2.68%. And that refers to 2020, 2021. So it's a moving target. So even spending 20 billion, you know, we need to go further. And money matters. Putting resource into this agenda matters. I think my sort of substantive points that I wanted to kind of finish on were you know, that's all great. And I think it's an area that I absolutely support your description of it, and I absolutely support kind of government's understanding that, you know, this is a way of addressing both of those and potentially realising both of those agendas around productivity and also around regional and local inequality. But I wanted to kind of chuck in three problems that you're going to have to tackle, and that we as a kind of broader community will have to think more about. Three problems that tend to get in the way of those aspirations. And those kind of three problems are, firstly, policy and institutional instability. The reason I mentioned kind of the birthday is that Innovate UK has lasted for 15 years, and that's really good, but it's also pretty rare. And if you look across, particularly across regions and localities in England, you see that incredible churn of policy approaches, of institutional arrangements. And you see it particularly in three areas. There's a fantastic report that I know many of you will have read that the Institute for Government released in 2017 called All Change. And it picked out the three kind of worst areas for policy and institutional change in English and UK kind of government. And they were skills policy, regional policy, and industrial strategy. So that's a worry. So if you like, there's a third valley of death. You know, if you're an institution and you're getting to about 3 or 4 years, there's a fairly good chance you're going to be scrapped. Or the kind of government, a new government, or sometimes the same government's going to come along and change those arrangements. So that's a particular issue, a challenge I want to sort of say. That's part of the world around you that your success is going to kind of have to cope with, if you like. The second of three is a coordination problem. And government, of course, has lots of agendas in lots of areas, and I've already mentioned skills. I know Anna will talk a little more about that. But the people challenge, how do you align that agenda around R&D, around kind of innovation, around the absorptive capacity of people and places to to turn those ideas into money. And we're not very good at coordination. Partly it's about instability, partly we just don't talk to each other. And we need to talk to each other, and we need to coordinate. So the amount of time you're going to have to spend with all the people that run those policies, I think, is important to acknowledge. And then I think the third and the final thing I wanted to say is that we still have a bit of a philosophy problem. And by philosophy problem, I mean the kind of philosophy around the role of government in thinking about these things. And over that sort of instability, if you like, around how interventionist government is, that has also swung pretty wildly over the last 20 years. Within governments of the same stripe as well as between different governments. And that swings, and we've seen it most recently. Bayes obviously still has industrial strategy in its title, but rarely mentions the words. And we saw sort of some of those institutions and that philosophy kind of deconstructed a bit when Theresa May ended her period as Prime Minister. But I'm probably somewhere in the active interventionist end of that spectrum. But the point I'm making is that government rarely stays in one place for long. And needing some kind of consistency and long-term approach there is probably critical, not just to the success of all of those policies as they come together and those objectives. It's also critical to kind of how you function as an organisation too. So those are kind of just three problems by way of a response, and that's more than enough, I think. David's looking at me, so I shall stop. I'll stop on three problems.
It's those laser eyes, isn't it? So give Anna a chance to come in on the skill stuff.
Thank you, David, and thank you, Indro, for a fascinating talk. I wanted to pick up on the people point that you made. And I'm here to really talk about the plumbing that you need to have in place in order for this to work. One of the challenges is that that plumbing takes years to put in place and needs to be stable. And the time frame that Andy was talking about by the end of the Parliament doesn't work well in the people space because it's a much longer project. We know that the UK has specific skill shortages, or let's call them skill mismatches, perhaps. Yeah. But we also know, as you rightly point out, that although innovation is distinct from research, they're operating in the same ecosystem, particularly when it comes to skills and when it comes to people. So these are, if you like, all fishing from the same pond. Yeah. And basically, we have an issue that not only is innovation lacking, or our innovation space lacking particular skills, but also it's lacking diversity. So we're missing out on some of that talent that's just missing altogether. And that is a great loss to the system. But you don't fix that overnight, let's put it that way. The other thing is you don't get to fix it piecemeal by piecemeal. So if you have a skills issue over here, you don't get to solve that because in isolation, because obviously people move across occupations, across sectors. So you're plugging holes. And unless you think of it as a system problem, I think it's really quite challenging. And by system problem, I mean skills at all levels, not just postgraduate level, skills from technician upwards. And the other thing I think we need to acknowledge is that this problem has worsened in recent years because firms are playing a lesser role in training individuals when you look at the data. Yeah. It's been quite a dramatic fall-off in training levels. Why? Well, partly because if we train people, they then command the high salaries because of the relative skill shortage, walk out the door. So we have to provide a system that can overcome that. And up to now, we've sort of plugged holes, if you like, by attracting wonderfully talented people from around the globe. If that's going to get harder, some of the ambition that we have here in terms of reaching that R&D spend is going to be very difficult to achieve. And anyway, even if we can do that, we might think, going back to your point about inequalities, that there's a cost involved in purely filling those gaps from people coming into the country. We also need to be growing the talent, or at least trying to pay some attention to the areas that are left behind. Yeah. So I think that we have a system problem, an infrastructure problem, and I think we basically need three things to happen for your plan to work, if you like. And I'm conscious that this is not in your department and your domain, although there are people here responsible for skills, so maybe the message can get out there. But we need a stable and thriving education system. We need to recognise that we have anchor institutions in places. Their schools, their colleges, their universities. They play an absolutely pivotal role in creating that human capital. And we also know that bar top graduates, most of that can be remarkably immobile. So if we're fixing the levelling up and the geographic issues, we need to focus on what skills systems are in place in each specific locality. We can't just do this at national level. The other thing is we need to think about individuals having to change direction. We have a remarkably specialised education system. It's narrow, you specialise early, people head down a track and then realise that they need a different set of skills. So unless we have, to use the dreaded phrase, a lifelong learning system in place, it's really tricky. And I know lifelong learning is easy to say and hard to achieve, but thinking about ways in which we can recognise that not everybody gets their skills the first time, that they will have a lifetime of acquiring skills, and how do we put in place a system that can get the skills when they need them. And I think the final point I would make is, if we're thinking about the people problem, we also need to take a people perspective on why it is that we've ended up with either skill shortages in some areas or a lack of diversity when it comes to some areas. What are the barriers and the incentives in place? And some of that is about rethinking at universities, rethinking how we do our courses so we get a broader range of skills, including skills that are useful for innovation. But some of it's also thinking about working conditions and the pathway to a job in innovation, which comes with a lot of risk, short-term contracts, et cetera, because a lot of the people that you're talking about will have started out in the research space, and we want to keep them in that R&D pipeline and then go on to innovation. And so we need to think about working conditions right the way through that pipeline. So just to conclude, these are, I'm very conscious, very big issues that don't all belong in the domain of Innovate UK. But I was struck by the point that you made that Innovate UK was a delivery organisation. And that, of course, at some level is absolutely right. But I hope it can also be an advocate for the other bits of the system that need to be in place for the innovation to happen. And to be working with other bits of government, and particularly the skills system and the Department for Levelling Up, to try and think about this in a more holistic and system-wide way. Otherwise, I think it's going to be really quite tricky to achieve.
Great, thanks, Anna. Indro, look, we've laid out quite a serious set of issues here, and this point about the systems issues, I think, come right at the heart of what we need to address. Just so the audience can get ready, you're going to get a chance to join into this debate, but let's hear Indro respond to Anna and to Andy.
I think Anna and Andy's points are really very good, and I think all of them are spot on. So a couple of points that I want to react to, and I obviously can't react to all of those points because those were brilliant points and I wouldn't have the chance to, but let me just pick 2 or 3 out. So I chose the word delivery deliberately because I think it's very important that we are focused on outcomes and output. And so even when that outcome and output is a new thought leadership or a new style or a new approach, we need to think of ourselves as people who do things. And I say that because whilst I absolutely know that Innovate UK is not a business, and remember what I said, every year of my career has been spent in private business up until a year ago. So it's impossible for me to simply stop being a business guy. I don't know how to do that. So we are not a business, we're not a P&L, we're a public service, but I think it's very important that for the public money that we use and spend, that we do things and we have outputs. That's what I was trying to do. So I'm really pleased that Anna picked that up because it gives me a chance to elaborate what I actually meant on that. I am very pragmatic, and also remember I am a public servant, not a civil servant, and not an apologist so I'm a public servant. And so we are expected to voice opinions where those are relevant to helping the system. And I think a lot of the things that we heard from Andy and Anna are absolutely things that we would be able to voice. We do voice them, we can articulate them, and these are things that even when it's not fully in our realm, we can still wave a flag. And I think we have to pick the battles that we want to to wave flags on. And this is what I'm interested also to get from the audience, any steer on those things, because clearly we're not going to be able to boil the ocean and do every single thing. So what's the advice? What's the things that we could focus on to be practical? I just want to mention one quick last thing, if I may, and that is to do with timescales. Absolutely, if you chop and change things, that's not motivating for anybody. And you have to be respectful to due process and life cycles. But at the same time, I think we need to help governments to understand that. I don't think it's the role of government to understand industry, sectors, technologies as well as we do, as well as you do. So we have to help them. So I think they need our help and they need us to wave our hands and say things to them. So I'll maybe say more later when there's other comments, but I'd be happy to say more and hear any comments.
No, thank you. Thanks, Indro. I'm just not quite sure about the audio. Can everybody hear? Fine. Okay, good. Excellent. Anna or Andy, did you want to respond to any of that before I open up to the audience? We got Yingji at the back over there. We've got a microphone for you.
Yes.
Yeah, we do. Especially for you.
Oh, thanks so much, David, and really inspiring points. And what I particularly like to hear from Innovation UK is some of the specific approaches in terms of delivery. For example, relative to the US, Germany, or Switzerland. For example, relative to US, the stock market profiles are very different. Relative to Germany, the approach to manufacturing is very different.
Yep.
Relative to Switzerland, the approach to enable specialization in different locations of the country is very different. As a result, that's much more even distribution and also very conscious efforts to specialize each areas. And none of these are things that Innovation UK can change over time, overnight, sorry, over time maybe. But I think these should be treated perhaps as a delivery organization, as the environment. So what I like to hear from Innovation UK is where your strategies are going to differentiate from these countries.
Yeah. Okay.
Indro, do you want to come back straight
Do
on
you
that?
want to do that, or should we take several
let's do a question at a time. I find it difficult otherwise to. We'll get a thread as we go through. Go on. But brief response.
Brief response is that I think the question is excellent. I think the hypothesis is absolutely spot on. We know this. We're studying all those different countries that the gentleman mentioned and others, and we are looking at quite extensive benchmarking in how those things are done. We will
speak up a little bit, I think. If you speak up a little bit.
Sorry, can you not hear me?
Let's try that microphone. Okay. Try that microphone.
Oh, sorry, I beg your pardon. I thought my lapel mic was still working. I do beg your pardon. So I was just saying that I completely agree with the hypothesis that the gentleman there has just asked, and he's absolutely spot on. And we are benchmarking a number of countries and different styles of how innovation support is given in those areas. Our quest ultimately is to be able to differentiate ourselves in the most practical way. I think one route for that is by incremental growth. And in order to do that, I think our place strategy is going to be very important. And so maybe if there's time, I'll say more about clusters. I think this could be an area of quite significant relevance and strength for the UK. I think we can better productize place and better link in terms of local development, but also foreign direct investment into areas by better productizing place. And I think that the selection of themes in terms of technologies will be another area. And so these are not areas that I think it's appropriate to perhaps elaborate on in this conversation, but I agree with the gentleman's question completely.
Great, thanks. Lady in the middle there. And then I'm going to come down along this row here.
Thank you. Andrea West, I'm actually representing a charity today, but my question is coming from years of involvement in innovation policy. Now, the UK is generally, when it's come to innovation policy, focused on individuals and individual companies. Now, we know when you're looking at things like innovation districts around the world that the shift has been much more, not beyond clusters now, to thinking through the relationships between sectors, between people, between the community, between large, small businesses, etc. Now, I've just recently been advising one of the innovation districts, and to be honest, I'll say absolutely bluntly, there wasn't one. And the reason there wasn't one is because of the lack of collaboration and networking in that area. And I really think this is something that we have a massive problem with in Britain. And it would be interesting to know whether or not you're thinking within your place-based strategy of providing that, brokering those spaces for the kind of network and collaboration we desperately need to see, because nobody's funding that. There is nowhere I mean, they can't do it. These individual companies can't do it. But there is a gap, and nobody is able to fill that at the moment.
Yeah, let's all three panellists respond. Indro first, go on.
I think you're absolutely right. So we're trying to incentivize, or let's say better, maybe encourage is a better word, collaboration and co-creation by using the best in ecosystems. And so, as you may know from the Levelling Up white paper, there are 3 innovation accelerators that were named, 3 areas that were named, and we see a chance to do something and have a new model of co-creating innovation collaboration. And we have some particular tools and instruments that we're working on exactly for the reason that you said, because I 100% agree with your point that there isn't enough active collaboration. In many cases, we have the ingredients already there, but they either don't know each other or just aren't talking to each other. So we have to be able to encourage that. It's interesting, the first word I used was incentivize it, which is then my business thing. I do mean encourage. But, you know, there has to be a little bit of way that the encouragement takes a bit of form. So I agree with your premise.
Andy and Anna, do you want to respond to that?
Yeah, I mean, let me respond on behalf of the GM Innovation Accelerator, given that we've got one and we're very pleased to have one.
Exactly.
I mean, I think Andrew, your point's absolutely right. I think Indro, yes, some of those assets are there, and some of the kind of actors and people are there, but we shouldn't underestimate how much you need to build some institutions from scratch.
Yeah.
And you need to build some capacity across the system.
Yeah.
You know, there isn't a kind of local ecosystem that is just waiting, ready to go. It's the importance of kind of capacity building within public institutions, within universities, and within the kind of bits of the private sector or private finance that exist there.
Yes.
The importance of building capacity and actually building some institutions from the ground up. I mean, the combined authority is still only a few years old, for example, are going to be an important part of making that work. But I think it's a very good direction to take.
Hannah?
Yes, thanks. I mean, I think that question's spot on, particularly in relation to the skills question. Where you see it being done effectively, where there is more collaboration, you often see different parts of the skills sector coming together, because we know that supply-side policy on its own doesn't do it, right? There are supply and demand. And some level of coordination across the different institutions is really, really helpful. I think there's also a question of leadership here. And I guess that was my point about deciding where you already have anchor institutions that can potentially play a leadership role in bringing people together. I mean, it doesn't take away from your point that you need to fund it and provide those spaces, but you know, we can't build everything from scratch. And there are regions where when you look in detail, you can see, for example, whether it's the university or the local FE college playing a really pivotal role. You know, we don't want to overplay the skills point, because obviously there's a lot that goes into this mix to make it work. But it is a necessary but not sufficient condition.
I must admit, I come to questions at the front of the second. I may be able to throw my voice enough for people to be able to hear me. But the thing that strikes me about this is that we've got an ecosystem not very far away from here that seems to have been fairly successful. It's generated 23 $1 billion companies. In one of those companies, and I'll come to you, Stephen, in a second, one of those companies, if the proceeds from its sale was distributed to every man, woman and child in Cambridge, each of them would receive over £300,000. And I just wonder why is it that the government doesn't pay more attention to Cambridge and how Cambridge actually operates? Does anybody ever puzzle about this? I mean, Cambridge has not taken, I mean, obviously the university and research has government money, but Cambridge Network didn't receive government money. Raj, you're chairman of Cambridge Wireless, didn't receive government money. Cambridge Ahead has not received government money. None of those institutions, Cambridge Angels, none of those institutions actually received government money. So what does that say about what we're trying to do here? I've got silence. Stephen. A microphone. Where's the microphone gone? And then I'm going to go to Rob, and I've got a hand up at the back, and then I'm going to go to Andy. And then we're probably going to finish.
Thank you very much. Stephen Patterson from ARM, a high-tech company headquartered here in Cambridge. And actually, in response to David's comment, and David knows this very well, you know Herman Hauser's comment about how do you create a cluster? You build a university and you wait 700 years and something so if it were easy, everybody would have done it, and Cambridge has been very successful. But that wasn't the point I was going to make. I was going to try to help Indro, because I think you gave a great talk, and you're being, all these things are being thrown at you. I wanted to ask whether you've thought about the different kind of partnerships for Innovate UK. And I'm thinking in particular, actually education and finance are the two sectors, right? So I think you could spend a lot of time talking to the tech sector, and despite the brickbats, you'll find we're all on the same page. But when we talk, and you mentioned it, when we talk about turning innovation into economic reality, actually what you need are financial agents. And there has been long discussion about the failure of scale-up funding. And this came up at a meeting I was at here in Cambridge a few weeks ago, and there was a banker present, and he said that one of the reasons why scale-up funding is in such short supply is that we no longer have the banks who are willing to do scale-up funding. If you're a bank these days, it's actually much easier if a reasonably healthy early-stage company comes to you to say, actually, much better for you to sell out to another company, because then you make loads of money, we make loads of money, and it's a lot easier than our structuring alone. So someone needs to be talking to the finance sector, and I use that word because I don't know who the interlocutors are, about how can they come on board and support the Innovate UK agenda. And I think the same is a bit true of education. I think it's better in education. It's some of the points that Anna was making, but I think there's also points about how can we better link research and enterprise, entrepreneurial flair and skills.
Indro, brief response on that.
Two responses. So you're absolutely right. The finance sector, I think, is the potential game changer. And when I talked about the second valley of death earlier, that's the area where I think the strongest collaboration with the finance sector is going to go the longest way in terms of making a joined up way to support. So we're putting a huge amount of effort into that, and a huge amount of effort into better showcasing the businesses we support, both through in terms of funding and also in terms of advisory, with the excellent base that we have of private finance in the UK, and joining those together better. So we're making a system. The code name for this is the Transformer Project, and so it'll be announced in the second half of this year, and there'll be a program which will then be able to make a platform to better link those two areas together, and have the third-party finance community be able to access in a few clicks all of the businesses that we've effectively put public money into diligencing and supporting and making that thing. That's a very specific thing. I think your point is actually better than that, because I think you were making a meta point, which I completely agree with on that level too. And so we need to make structural linkages, even sometimes using legislation, regulation, between business and finance to facilitate this journey. Can I add one more point?
Go on,
just very quickly. I want to also use your point to share something on a bit of a personal basis. So just imagine, and how many people in this room are working businesses, are business owners or business people, CEOs, runners, or see people in business? Thank you. So not actually, I was expecting more. So when you're a business guy, you have a very, very clear purpose. So your purpose is your business. You've got some numbers, you've got a company, you've got an organisation, etc. One of the challenges of this job is to be able to find a set of parameters that you can stick to, and that is not the flavour of the moment for a particular thing, and you can stick to it, and that's what you need to be, and that's the difference that you need to make. If I can share with you on a bit of a personal basis, I could do nothing all day but cut ribbons and be the metaphorical kissing baby. I'm being very serious. I'm being absolutely serious. I could go to lunch parties, dinner parties, garden parties, including, by the way, I can see some people here in this audience that have invited me to some. So I could do that all the time, and folks would say, what a breath of fresh air this new CEO of Innovate UK is. Oh, he's so active, he's doing all these things, and touch nothing of the things that we've just been discussing. Mm-hmm. On the other side of the equation, I could also spend all of my time inside and sort our system, sort our structure, do all these things, and no one ever sees me outside. And say, what was that guy? I thought I had high hopes for that guy. I met him once and then I never saw him again, etc. So one of the challenges in a job like this is where do you pitch your thing? What's the flag that you do? And as a purposeful leader, because that's all I've been doing for the vast majority of my career, leading organisations, you think about these things. And so I just want to share that with you. And if anyone's got some suggestions, I'm very willing to hear your brain power. And you can follow up by writing to me and contacting me afterwards, because I'd love to hear any suggestions.
I think it's cloning technology is going to be the way forward. Rob, then at the back, and then Andy. And we're going to try and finish in about 10 minutes, slightly under. So that's a guideline as to how long to make your questions and responses.
Okay, I'm Rob Miller, director of a lab called the Whittle Lab, and I'm very much in favour of clusters. We lead a cluster which is very different than other Cambridge clusters. All the companies are in the northeast, in Lincoln, in Malmesbury, in Derby, in Bristol, and we've translated hundreds of technologies over the years into those products. Yep. And Innovate UK have been great supporters in that work, but I think there's a gap in what Innovate UK fund. Yep. And the catapults are doing well, the universities do well, the companies do well. But in a part of the market which is being rapidly disrupted, science and the translation of that science are going on concurrently. And you need to break the silo boundaries between the two. You need spaces in which they can come together, cluster rapidly around a problem, and translate it to demonstration fast. And that's really what the Bell Lab did. Yeah. And there are these islands of brilliance which are non-linear, and they're the way countries own future technologies. And aerospace is going through that at the current moment. And that's the sort of lab which would be a non-linear difference which Innovate UK could fund.
Interesting.
Right, that's more of a statement than a question, but that's fine. We'll pass over that. Right to the back, if we can manage that. Can we? I believe this lecture theatre has a microphone embedded in a cushion that you can actually throw, which provides quite a lot of entertainment, but I wouldn't advise doing it with that particular object. There we go.
Oh, sorry, Simon Strickland, Cabinet Office. Thanks very much for your presentation. If I understand you correctly, you define innovation in terms of the translation of ideas or knowledge into money. And so I assume that when you look at the business appraisal for a pitch to your organisation, you're looking at it purely in monetary terms. The outcome, in other words, will be an essentially financial one. So I guess my question is, to what extent can you entertain notions of subjective well-being in the kind of pitch that's put to you? Thanks very much.
Oh gosh, tricky. That's a tricky one. Indro.
Yeah, so that's a good question, because I mentioned earlier about holistic impact and holistic dashboards. So, sorry. I mentioned earlier about holistic impact and holistic dashboards, and I completely agree that we need to be able to move to a sophisticated suite of balanced indicators which are not just money. So I focused on the money side only to illustrate. I had, in a short talk and to make a quick impact, I wanted to use the word delivery to show that we are a practical, hands-on, sleeves rolled up organisation that takes spending public money seriously, and the impact part, because we have to start somewhere. But I agree with the premise of the question that we have to have a holistic way of looking at things.
Anna, could I come to you? Because, I mean, the skills agenda and education is actually inextricably linked to that ability for people to reach quality of life, isn't it?
Yeah, absolutely. And also the inequalities that you referred to are perhaps most obvious in the education space, but they completely translate into all manner of measures of life outcomes, whether that's well-being, health, etc. So it's probably too much to put on Innovate UK, an agenda where you're trying to solve some of these really big inequality issues. But I think perhaps a slightly different question is, to what extent could you exacerbate them with the policies that you have where you concentrate funds, etc.? So to what extent should you be thinking, for example, about place and a geographic distribution of activity as an end in its own right? But, you know, big question for the economists in the room, is there a trade-off there? You know, and also going back just very quickly to David's point about Cambridge, I mean, apart from waiting 750 years, I do think there are some features of the institution itself, and particularly its permissive attitude towards academics having a lot of free rein, that actually do encourage the kind of activity that we've seen there. Now, that's something other institutions could be persuaded to go down that route. So I think there's lessons to be learned there on how our skills institutions and our universities in particular can play a role.
Yeah, place can be both a cause and a consequence, and there are differences between the two.
Yeah, and I think that there's, picking up on Rob's point about the non-linearity in this, that once you focus on something and you start a fire going in that sense, you can have a disproportionate effect. And I think that's another lesson that I've been surprised over the last 20 or 30 years in Cambridge, although I've been here for rather longer than that, actually, now I think about it. That seems to characterize almost everything that I've seen in terms of innovation. And I recently, I'm just on another personal note, a part of the Royal Academy of Engineering, I chair the Enterprise Committee, and I went to Northern Ireland a couple of weeks ago just to do the same thing. And there is a spark starting in Northern Ireland, but you've got a massively embedded engineering base there from which you can do things. And the conversation around the table and the subsequent meetings that have taken place, simply as a consequence of that, are the indicators that Cambridge or Oxford or what goes on down in London are not the only places in the country where you can set this stuff going. And I'm a great optimist about it. And I think we ought to look very carefully at where those specialisms are in those different places in order to be able to kick things off. Andy.
Thank you. So Andy Neely, Pro Vice Chancellor for Enterprise and Business Relations at the university. I want to pick up on something that a point that Anna made, Indro, which related to your comment about Innovate UK as a delivery organisation. Anna saying, it also needs to be an advocacy organisation. And think about place and people and ideas and the complex innovation ecosystem that we have. One of the areas that I think Innovate UK could be most helpful in at the moment in terms of advocacy is Horizon Europe, and making sure that we don't accidentally cut ourselves off from a whopping great part of an innovation ecosystem. Would you like to comment on the likelihood of that?
Oh, my word.
Gosh,
my word.
I think you mentioned that you wanted to close in 10 minutes. So Horizon is a great point, Andy, and I can tell you that that's taken up a lot of our time and other people's times. So the position is that, the default position is that we want to associate. In the event of non-association, that will have quite significant implications, and I can't go into those implications now, certainly not within 10 minutes and probably not in general anyway, but there are very significant implications, and so we are thinking very deeply about your question. So, but I'm sorry, I can't say more than that right now.
Well, I have a personal interest in that, as I've got a project up in Glasgow which is going to benefit from Horizon UK money if it eventually comes in. But there we go.
I can't listen to any of your...
No, you can't. Exactly. Also a recipient of Innovate UK money, but there we go. So you can't listen to that either. So let's do a wrap up. And Anna and Andy, I'd like you just to make some comments. I'll make a comment, and then Indro, perhaps you just want to say a couple of points. So Anna, did you want to say something just as a kind of conclusions from all of this?
Yeah, so I think my general point here is that, first of all, sort of recognition that education doesn't have all the answers and our institutions don't have all the answers, but a sort of plea that we probably can play a central role in all of this, and more so than we have done in the past. And to think about the coordination that does require. I know it's a theme that Andy might take up in terms of specific places, tying things together so that you've got a supply of skills at all levels and across the necessary areas that you need to fill the demand. I don't think we can get away without doing that. It's the hard work, and we've got to get on with it.
Andy?
Well, unsurprisingly, I agree with that. I think let me make two points. I think on the coordination and place point, we were having a discussion before about, well, what does better coordination actually mean, and kind of thinking about clusters and particular places. Stephen, in the Levelling Up white paper, there's some fantastic maps about kind of clusters of specialism that exist.
Yep.
Unfortunately, at DFE, they're creating institutions of technology, and they don't correspond to that map. So that's something you might want to ask a question about, because it kind of captures that lack of coordination that kind of gets in the way of precisely what Anna's sort of hinting at there. And then I think my last point really is I really like this notion that can I kind of characterise it as that your challenge between delivery and garden parties. But also the other sort of challenge between kind of advocacy, delivery and advocacy. And I think the reality of the world we're in is that you have to do the right mix of all of those things.
Of course. Yeah.
Now, it might not seem the right mix, but by getting involved in the advocacy and the garden parties, you get the profile and the chance to ask those questions, or to raise questions about Horizon. I suspect the answer isn't going to be a good one, by the way, but that's another issue. So I think it's important to accept that you're going to be doing all of those things if you're going to be successful.
I know, I know that, and that's one of the reasons why I'm here.
Well, hence my remark about the clothing. Indro, I'll let you do a closing remark, but just want to draw attention to one thing, which is linked back to Cambridge and going back to my experience of what I've seen here, and what we're experiencing here at the Centre for Science and Policy. That actually it's creating those networks of people that make things happen. And unintended consequences of those networks. For example, we were talking about a chap called Mike Emmerich earlier, just now. Mike was a policy fellow. I remember meeting him for the first time, having a chat, thinking, this is an interesting chap. He's been at Treasury, gone up to Manchester. Little did I know what impact he was going to have on policy in Cambridge and how we were going to evolve. And I can tell you dozens and dozens and dozens of examples like that. Just a plea before you finish up. Please, really, we need a proper system for putting people in touch with each other. Part of the problem of breaking through the silos between education, for example, and some of the other policy things we've been dealing with is not to have some central mega brain trying to work out how to solve these problems. No, distribute this to people. Have a network of people who, by chance, will have the right conversations, just as we've done in Cambridge. But Indro, it's been fascinating. Can I pass back to you?
You can. Thank you so much, and thank you for the invitation and for everybody's attention and questions. And so I just want to conclude with 3 comments. We will transform ourselves as a nation and as a system if we can get the best out of our skills and talent pipeline. So I completely agree about the education system. I agree with everything else. But from an attitude point of view, if all of us work to make a difference and understand how we can be more inclusive, how we can stimulate more diversity. So I wanted to give you one small example. 2 months ago, we organised a day's conference in Innovate UK to arrange ourselves as to how we are seen by innovators who are disabled. So we invited representatives from disability support groups, a number of innovators who are disabled, some business groups, people across government, people from academia, and we spent a full day, with prep and stuff afterwards, asking ourselves the question, what do we look like from somebody else's point of view? And of course, we are not going to fix everything in one day, and that's not what I'm talking about. But I'm talking about having the attitude and having the humility to want to go on a journey to understand what it's like from somebody else's point of view. And so we have programs for many, many, many diverse and inclusive innovation programs. And on another occasion, I could very happily take you through a lot of them. You can see a number of them, and they've been very successful. This is going to be a big thing for us because we think our skills pipeline needs to have this stimulus. That's the first point. The second point is that, of course, I see the balance between delivery and thought leadership. And by the way, I actually have a pretty good idea where on that continuum between the garden parties and things. But my point was that we live in a world where brilliant people all unsurprisingly have their own original ideas. And so it's not the right time to take a firm, concrete and dogmatic position. It's the time to show that you're open to ideas. And so I actually meant what I said, that if anyone does have ideas, we are very open to them, and we are very open as an organisation to learning. We've taken thought leadership in many, many different areas, and this we see as a very fundamental part of our role, and the role that actually I was given personally by the Secretary of State in terms of taking away showing this area and showing this advocacy and thought leadership. So again, that's an area that we very much embrace. On place can be a consequence or a cause, and we definitely have to start to become much more aware of the implications, because place is a very relevant factor in our country. And anyone who just does any travelling around the UK, and I'm sure that many of us do that here, you can see that for yourselves. Just open your eyes and you can see it for yourselves. And so it would be brilliant to do what David said, which is to export the genius, the brilliance, the inspiration from Cambridge right round the UK. If we could do that, that would be great. So let's try and do that together, but let's try and have a real strength of openness. And so I really want to say that for this CSAP community, we are very much open to going on a journey of learning. And so if no other message was clear, I'd like that one to be clear, because we really need to have the brain power, the energy and the advice from everybody. And I'm very open to continuing the conversation over dinner, those of us who are going over. David.
Indro, thank you very much. Encourage diversity, be open, and place is important. Absolutely perfect. Thank you so much.